Hi all, I'm Professor Tina Good, and this mini video is going to be discussing the revision process. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen so that we can go over the PowerPoint that I've set up for this video. Okay, so we're going to look at revising versus proofreading. A lot of people talk about these two terms as synonyms, that they mean the same thing, but actually they are two different parts of the writing process. Okay, so let's consider this for a moment. Okay, so as I said, proofreading is not the same as revising. While proofreading is an important aspect of the writing process, it is the last thing we do in the writing process. Okay, it's a separate part. Some people think of it as a part of the revision process. I don't even like to do that because I don't like it to get confused. But it is the part where we do the fixing, right? We do what we call editing. Um, and questions that we ask in proofreading are very different than what we ask when doing a revision process. Okay, so I have another video on how to proofread, but questions that we ask during proofreading is my paragraphing correct, right? Do I have one point per paragraph? Have I run on? Did I indent properly? Right? Those kinds of things. Is my sentence structure correct? So you'll go back and you'll check to make sure that you don't have run-on sentences or fragments, or that you've used your commas correctly, or things like that. Did I put periods in? Did I put question marks in? Is my word choice correct? So if you use there, and there improperly, or where and where improperly, right? If these are things that you run into, did you use the right word choice? Did you type it correctly? Is the grammar correct? Is the verb tense correct, right? Those are things that you might look at in proofreading. Is my spelling correct, right? Just simply things like that, where we're editing and fixing, okay? This is the last part, this is the polishing part of the writing process. But before we get to that, we have this process called revision. And if I were in a classroom right now, what I would do is I would stand up in front of the classroom, and I would go like, okay, here's the view of the classroom. And I see all of this from this particular perspective, right? And then I would go stand in another part of the classroom, and I would go, it's the same classroom, right? But now I have a different perspective on it. That is what we're looking at when we think about revision, right? Revision, right? So maybe even thinking of it as revisioning your essay rather than revising your essay, but because it is a more holistic approach to your essay than that fixing part of proofreading, right? You're not looking at individual sentences or paragraphs or words, right? You're saying that, I'm not saying that you're not doing that while you're reading. Of course, like, again, all of writing is an iterative process, right? But that's not the part you're focusing on. You're probably looking much more at your content, right, when you are looking to revise your essay. So what are the questions that we ask when we're doing our revising process, right? So the first thing that we consider is, have I met the requirements of the assignment? Okay, if you have written a paper that does not answer the prompt, there's going to be a holistic, change in your essay, right? So go back and read that assignment and make sure that you understand what the assignment is asking for one more time, because of course you did this when you first started writing, but go back one more time and read it and make sure that you've accomplished what the writing assignment is asking you to do. Make sure that you meet the minimum page requirement, right? Because if it's requiring 3 full pages and you have 2, that's going to require some substantial revision, because you don't just add on, right? That's not a good writing process, right? So what points can you further develop? Is your thesis statement, too narrow, right? Is it maybe not arguable enough, or is it arguable, but you haven't brought up all the points that you could bring up, right? Or maybe you haven't brought in enough evidence, but you got to meet that page requirement, okay? And that's not just by tacking something on. Um, and have you followed all the instructions of the prompt, right? Because they're going to be like prompt itself, and then there's going to be like double space and all of that kind of stuff. So let's say you didn't double space. Or that, and then you double space and it changes how your page looks, your essay looks. Okay, now you're gonna maybe have to do some revision. Did it give instructions about the introduction? Did it give instructions about the conclusion? Did it give instructions about how to bring in evidence, right? So did you meet all of the instructions of the assignment? And you have to go back in. And if you didn't, it's going to be more than fixing, more than proofreading. You're going to have to bring in content, bring in evidence, maybe do a little bit more reading in order to, meet that requirement. Okay, so other questions that we ask once we, make sure that we've met the assignment is, now we're getting really into that writing process. Like, who is my audience? Who am I writing this essay for? Whether it's a narrative assignment or if it's an expository assignment. Think about who your audience is. What is their likely experience or knowledge base or opinions on this topic? And remember, an audience is not somebody who's going to have, an absolute opposing view to what your essay is on, right? You're looking to speak to people who, maybe have informed opinions on this matter, or haven't looked at the issue quite in this way. Right? Maybe that they're not antagonistic to the idea, but they haven't looked at it quite in the way that you're presenting it, right? So what do you want your audience that you've identified, right? What do you want them to think about differently as a result of reading your essay, right? And so by identifying your audience and all of these kinds of things, right? Have you brought in the information that you need, right, to address this audience's concerns, this audience's needs, this audience's perspective? Okay. If you write for one audience, it's going to be different than if you write for a different audience, right? So you really want to focus in on that when thinking about revision. What might your audience disagree with, right? Have you considered, what they might disagree with when writing your essay? This isn't necessarily counter argument, although if we were writing a straight argument paper, maybe you would think about that. But think about how you're being sensitive to, what your audience needs are, right? And not only with how they agree with you, right? How they relate to you, but what they might disagree with. Have you provided sufficient information to connect with your audience so that they will consider your point of view, to consider that point of your essay? Have you connected with them? Do they understand, sort of what we would call your ethos, or, your credibility? Do you need to add or delete any information, right, in order to connect with your audience? And have you used the right tone? Right. People always think that I use this like weird professional academic tone. It's not a real tone, right? And it's usually not going to be persuasive of anyone, right? So using your own voice, have you used the right tone to communicate to your audience, but also get them to think about what you're presenting to them, in this new way, right? So you don't want to use a threatening tone, probably. You don't use, what is the tone you need, and have you accomplished that? And if not, what do you need to do to, create that tone, right? So that your audience will read your whole essay and consider the point of view that you're bringing in. further now beyond the audience, right? Is your purpose clear, right? Especially, if you're writing a narrative, right? Every narrative should still have a purpose, right? So by the time you get to, is it clear? If you're writing an expository essay, do you have a clear thesis statement? Is it an arguable thesis statement? Could some reasonable person argue against, what you're suggesting in your thesis statement simply because they interpret something differently, right? We don't want to look at it as something that's wrong or right. That's the wrong way to look at it. But more, oh, you're right as far as you go, but did you consider this evidence? Did you consider this point of view? Did you consider this, right? So we're broadening the discussion rather than going, you're right, I'm wrong, right? Because that's very limiting. Um, do you have an attention getting introduction, right? You can have the best paper, but if it's not attention getting and people don't read beyond the first sentence, it doesn't do you any good. So is it attention getting? Have you been intentional about making it attention getting? Do you set up the topic well enough in your introduction so that your audience is ready for the rest of the essay? Is your essay coherent? And that's a big word, but what it means is, does it flow together, right? Do your paragraphs connect well to each other? And do the paragraphs connect back to your introduction and back to your thesis statement, right? So is everything holding together well because of the connections that you've woven through your essay, usually through your topic sentences? Do you have too much repetition, right? Have you accidentally, kept repeating yourself, kept repeating your thesis statement, right? And if so, you probably are not developing enough points to prove it, right? So do I need to reduce my repetition and bring in and develop different points? Have I provided enough specific details to accomplish the purpose, right? So in a narrative, right, have you evoked the senses? Have you done all those things that we talked about, right, in order to accomplish your purpose so that your audience is understanding um, your perspective and your point of view, so much so that they can connect to it. Or if you're writing expository, have you provided enough evidence, right, to make your point in each of those paragraphs? And have you explained how your evidence proves these points, whether it's evidence from an external source or whether it's evidence from your own experience, right? You've brought in that evidence. Have you shown, right? Have you connected that evidence and shown how it proves your point? Do all of your points have evidence, right? And does your conclusion, does it go beyond repeating the points of your essay, right? Does it go beyond cliche, therefore, we all, change is inevitable. We all should love each other, whatever it is, right? Does it go beyond sort of this cliche and make us think about something in a slightly different way, right? Because of what we've read. And maybe you have a call to action in your conclusion. Have you done something different besides just repeating and resorting to some simple cliche? Okay. And so in asking these questions, right, you'll see that these are, holistic questions. These are content questions. These are not going in and fixing commas. These are not going in and editing it. But in so doing, if you bring up one point, that might change the way that you connect throughout the rest of the essay. Just adding in another paragraph doesn't do it. You may have to revise other paragraphs around that, right, to make it back to a coherent essay, right, or a coherent narrative. Okay, so listen, this all takes practice, and don't think that I expect it to be perfect. What I will be looking for is application. Um, this is actually a skill that actually really strong writers don't always learn how to do because they haven't had to revise. They haven't had to do these kinds of things because they can just knock something out, and so they don't have to revise. But this is a separate skill that is a part of the writing process that all people, no matter how strong their writing process is, needs to work on. Okay, so think of revision as different than proofreading. Proofreading comes at the end, revision comes before proofreading, after drafting. Okay, again, as I've told you in other videos, I'm setting this out as a linear process so that we can explain it, but all of this is an iterative process. It goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Okay, so I hope you found this video useful. I look forward to reading your essays, and I hope you all are having a great day.